Professor Richard Day teaches at the University of Hawaii, the beautiful Hawaii. He is an expert in reading. In fact, he's the best in the world. So we're very fortunate to have him with us. He's worked extensively on extensive reading. And in fact, he's known as the father of extensive reading. So we have a father figure with us, in a sense. He has written several books on reading, and I'll just mention 3 of them so teachers can look at them. New Ways in Teaching Reading, Extensive Reading in the Second Language, Extensive Reading Activities for Teaching English. He's written several articles in the most prestigious journals. He travels all over the world. And in fact, the National Teachers Organization of Malaysia gave him an award as well. So we're extremely happy to have Professor Day with us. So a very warm welcome to you, Professor Day.
Thank you.
Delighted to have you here.
Thank you for the nice introduction, if not exaggerated, I think.
No, it's not exaggerated at all,
yes,
because I attended your workshop. Yeah. It was an amazing experience for me. So now let's sort of help our teachers.
Okay.
So let's begin at the beginning. What is reading, Dr. Day?
That's a good question. Reading is very easy to define, but some people find it difficult to understand.
Yes.
On one level, I like to think of reading as an interactive process. An interactive process, not passive where the information is in the text and it comes into the reader's mind. That's sort of an old-fashioned view of reading.
Yes.
What we believe now is that there is this interaction between the text and the reader. The reader uses his or her knowledge, knowledge of the language, knowledge of the information in the text, knowledge of the world, to build, to create meaning.
So is that something in terms of the schema theory? Is that...
schema theory actually is a psychological construct that tells us how we organize information in our mind. So it really, now we realize it doesn't have that much to do with reading, but it helps explain how we organize or categorize information in our mind.
You talked about 4 approaches to teaching reading. What are these approaches?
Okay, that's a good question. Before I tell you about the 4 approaches, I would like to, it's important to know how we learn to read. I think that's really critical.
Absolutely, that should have come
before. Because that sort of precedes this, how do we teach reading? And it's how we learn to read is very simple, by reading.
Oh.
That's all. We learn to read by reading. There's no other way. And we know also from research that the more a student reads, the better reader the student becomes. It's very simple. I like to tell teachers that I will ask them something like, how do we learn to drive a car?
Yes.
Or how do we learn to swim? We actually have to do those things. We could see a video, go to a lecture about how to drive a car, read the rules of the road, the safety rules, but until we get behind the wheel and spend hours driving under the careful guidance of a teacher, we can't drive.
Yes.
We've got to do it. It's just like reading. Unless we actually give our students opportunities to engage in the act of reading, they will never become readers.
So what we should tell our teachers is that give as much material as you can so that the children read.
Children can read. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I won't get into the debate of the materials
not yet.
But I would like to then ask you now, the next question, which I should have asked before, is what are the approaches to teaching reading?
Yeah. Around the world, and India is included in this, generally there are 4 major ways that we teach reading, both in a first language and in a foreign or second language.
Okay.
The first one's very common to India, and this is common all over the world, and that's called grammar translation.
Yes.
I'm sure everyone is familiar with grammar translation, where there's a very short passage, short reading passage, very difficult most likely. Students will spend a lot of time looking up the words in their dictionaries and writing the translations above it.
Yes.
And then they come to class and they've got to stand up or give the translation in their first language. And then they look at the text as something that doesn't achieve meaning until it's in the first language.
Yes.
So
yes.
that's called grammar translation. Very, very, very common. Another way...
But would you advocate such a way?
I think grammar translation is great if students are going to spend their time translating.
Okay.
But it's not reading. That's
not
the
reading.
difficult.
Yeah.
Translating is translating is translating. It's
Yes.
very different from reading.
So in a sense, we tell our teachers that's a no-no.
If they're teaching reading, but if they're teaching translation, translation is a skill like reading. If the
Yes.
students have to translate in order to pass an examination, then they should receive the instruction in how to be a good translator.
Later.
But the problem is if we pretend it's reading, it sort of confuses the two because students think then that reading equals translation.
Which it doesn't.
Which it doesn't, yeah. And so they
Okay.
will go home and, of course, they're not going to sit down and read or translate because it's hard.
It's hard.
Very hard.
Who wants to sit and
Who wants to sit and translate a
Yes.
book? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'm not against grammar translation at all, but
But for different things.
for different things. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and that's the first.
That's the first one.
Yeah.
The second one is called comprehension questions and language work.
We do that all the time.
Yes,
in
it's
India.
very similar. Yes,
Yes.
it's very similar to grammar translation, except that maybe they will take that same passage that they have spent the time translating,
Yeah.
and then they will answer many, many detailed comprehension questions about this text. And then after they've answered all these comprehension questions, then they will look at the text, the reading passage, for some particular grammatical structure.
Yes.
Passive voice, question formation, whatever the
Yes.
text is supposed to illustrate, whatever the reading passage has in it that's grammatically the focus of the lesson.
And that's what happens all the time in India.
All the time. And grammar translation and comprehension questions are often combined. You know, it's not a question of one or the other, but they're often in the same lesson. Again, there's a real problem there.
In fact, you did say it's the depth of reading.
Yes, yeah. I think that when students spend a lot of time answering comprehension questions, I call that death by comprehension questions.
Or death by
Death by comprehension. It
comprehension.
kills any interest or any excitement that students have to have. On your own, just think if you were to read a book
Yeah.
at home, and then you were faced with 100 comprehension
No,
questions.
I wouldn't like it
No,
at
you wouldn't
all.
like it at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't read.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's one of the problems with the comprehension question language work is that students don't read enough. We learn to read by reading, and if they read these very short, difficult passages and then spend their time looking at language, looking for answers in the text, trying to understand it at a very, very deep level, they're never going to do that outside of the language classroom. They'll never do it.
No.
So they will never become readers.
Yes.
That's a difficulty. But if students have to pass an exam, which involves answering comprehension questions,
Which they have to.
then this is okay.
So this kind of training should be given.
If they have to answer these, if they have to take exams that are like that.
Yeah.
But teachers should not expect their students will enjoy reading, will love reading, will read outside of the classroom. They won't.
So they should do something beyond
They
this.
should do something beyond
Beyond
that. We'll get to that
Yeah.
in a second. Yeah.
So what is the third?
The third one is called skills and strategies. This is a very simple approach. It involves teaching learners the different skills and strategies that effective readers have.
So is it like... Yes?
So we've done research on, if you're a very good reader and you're reading an academic textbook, what do you do as a reader to help you understand the text?
Yes.
You have certain things that you do. For example, a very common strategy that readers do is when they come across a difficult word,
Yes.
they skip it.
They skip it,
Yeah.
yes. Or they ask the
Yeah,
teacher.
yeah. Or that's another
Or the
strategy.
dictionary.
Or they go to the dictionary. You've got a number of strategies. You can
Yeah.
skip it, you can guess, you can ask someone, you can look in a dictionary. So there are a variety of things that you can do when you come to difficult words. That's what I mean when I say skills and strategies. So what we do when we teach skills and strategies is teach our students these different types of strategies to make them more effective readers when reading academic texts.
Okay. Okay.
So this now is becoming very widespread. I'm not sure in India if it's as widespread as grammar translation and comprehension questions.
See, I don't think a lot of schools have grammar translation, but we have comprehension
questions
all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, reading is comprehension questions.
Yeah.
Nothing more than that. And skills and strategies we imagine, we get in our question types. So we may give them something like a skimming or a scanning exercise.
Right.
We may do something of that kind, but it's in the question types.
I see. So there is a little bit of focus on skills and
happening.
strategies. What's happened now is most of the major publishers publishing reading material are all skills and strategies. If you were to go to buy an Oxford University Press or Cambridge or Pearson Education, you don't have a choice. It's all skills and strategies.
So we need to make changes here. We definitely need to make changes here.
It depends upon your goals.
Yes.
What do you want students? What do you want students to end up as?
We want them to end up as readers. Definitely,
okay.
Most definitely.
The difficulty with skills and strategies. It works.
Yes.
We know from the research that if we give students training in reading strategies, they will be able to answer comprehension questions better than before the strategy training. The research is very clear on that.
Okay.
But there's a problem with it, and the research shows this. The problem is it really only works with students who are at least intermediate level readers or higher.
Okay. It does not work with the primary level readers.
No.
Okay.
And here's the reason why. Strategies help us read to learn.
Okay.
Read for information, read to learn. So that's why if you're reading a psychology textbook, you're trying to get information about the topic. Okay? Now, before you can read to learn, you must learn to read.
Yes.
And strategies and skills won't help us with learning to read. Because as we talked at just a few minutes ago, there's only one way we learn to read.
And that is by reading.
That's by reading.
Yes.
Yeah. So if we, as teachers, take time and are teaching these things, that's taking time away from learning to read, which is reading.
Yeah.
So the more teachers talk and teach, the less students are reading.
Okay.
So teachers should be more quiet and give their students more opportunities for engaging in the act of reading. So skills and strategies are great. I would say they're probably best at a university level where we've got students at an intermediate or higher level.
Yeah, but definitely not at the primary school level.
Not at, no, waste of time.
Waste of time.
And boring. Students might get bored with it,
Yeah, yeah.
They don't see the value in doing it.
And so the last...
The last one is extensive reading, something that you mentioned in your very kind introduction.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So, which is what the teacher should focus on?
At the beginning stages of reading, I think so, yeah. Because in extensive reading, by definition, students are reading extensively. They're reading a lot. And so this is the fourth approach, and this is the only one of the four that I've talked about that actually has the potential for having our learners become readers.
This is a problem which I must ask you, because we, in workshop, teacher training workshop after workshop, we, have this kind of problem. There is this tradition of reading aloud in the classroom. So, and it's very difficult to convince teachers to read, that reading is actually a silent activity. Can you now try your luck and convince our teachers?
Okay, I'm going to do two things, though. First, I'm going to say that students standing up, reading a passage, a sentence or two, and sitting down is not reading. This is actually pronunciation.
Yes.
It's really a pronunciation activity. It's okay if the goal is pronunciation, but if the goal is reading, it doesn't work. However, that said, at the very early stages of learning to read, students need to hear the language spoken while they're looking at a reading passage. Okay? So instead of having the teacher ask students to stand up and read.
Read, yes.
It's a good idea for teachers to read aloud to the students, and they can follow along in their books.
Okay.
So what they're doing then is getting the association between the sound that they hear and the printed word on the page.
Okay.
So they could say, oh, that's how that word sounds. That's how that word sounds.
All right.
At the beginning stages of reading, this connection between sound and the word, the printed word, is critical.
But say from class 4 or grade 4,
Yeah.
they should not do this.
They should have that connection. They should
Okay.
have. Now, if I were going to learn Hindi, for example, I would have to have you or someone else who's fluent in reading read to me, so I can. What are all these funny little things that I see all around me here?
Yes, yes.
What is the connection with the sounds?
Okay.
And until we get that oral connection, we can't really read.
Okay, so at the primary level, it's okay,
It's
but never
very,
after.
very, very important.
But
Very.
not after the primary.
I wouldn't recommend it. But,
Okay.
you know, you think of first language reading. As a parent, you read to your son
Yes.
all the time.
Yes.
And that's where, in first language reading, we get this sound, printed word connection. Usually it's done in the home. In some homes, there's no reading, there's no literacy, so
Yeah.
they've got to get it in the school, in the
Yes.
first language.
Yes.
But usually in the second language, that sound and printed word connection has to come in the classroom.
Yes.
So I'm not against oral reading
But only at the primary level,
by the teacher.
by the teacher.
Yeah.
So I hope, and I'm now looking at the teachers.
Dear
that,
teachers.
Yes, that Dr. Day has convinced you when I have failed. Okay. You've talked about, so what do you think are the outcomes of a reading program, for instance?
Oh, good.
You've talked about that.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yes.
I think that there are 4 desirable outcomes of a reading program. There may be more, but I think there are 4 primary ones. One is that we turn out fluent readers.
Okay.
By fluent reading, I mean a reader can read effortlessly, without hesitating, with confidence, at the right rate or the right speed, not too fast, not too slow, comfortably, seldom, if ever, stopping to look up words in a dictionary.
All right.
Fluent reading is very, very, very important.
And if they don't know the meaning of a word, they try and guess it.
Yeah, I would say, or skip it.
Or skip it.
We don't need to know. When you read in your first language, we often skip words.
Yes, we
Yeah.
do. When
But-
we read the newspaper,
Sure,
we skip words.
but if we discover we need it, we might go back, make a
Yeah.
guess, and go on.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So fluent reading is very, very important. Fluent reading is not slow reading, or it's not fast reading.
Yeah.
It's reading comfortably, without stopping, without looking up words in the dictionary.
Yeah. So that's the first thing.
That's number one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's number one. And how do we become fluent readers? That's a question that teachers ask me all the time. Teachers, and I'll tell you this. There's only one way that we can get our learners to become fluent in reading, and that is by reading.
Yes. Okay.
They have to read. So
Yeah.
the more your students read, the more fluent they will become.
In fact, I think you mentioned this research that the larger the library, what was the
Yes.
research that you
Okay, this is
mentioned?
very nice. This is some research that's been done in the United States.
Yes.
It shows that there is a strong correlation, a connection, between the number of books in a library
Oh.
and scores from that school on reading achievement tests.
Wow. So this is something that principals of schools and teachers must make note
Yeah,
of.
yeah.
Have lots of books.
Have lots of books on a variety of topics at a variety of different levels of readability. Some at a very low level of readability that beginning readers can read comfortably.
Yes.
Some at a rather what I would call a high level, close to first language reading text for our learners who are advanced. So one of the things that I think a school has to do is get a variety of books.
Okay. Okay.
So fluent reading is number one.
Yes.
Number 2 is what I call joyful reading.
Okay.
Joyful
yes.
reading.
Yeah.
This is not a term that we often associate with
No,
learning and with
no,
schools,
no.
joy and happiness and
Yes,
pleasure.
yes.
But I believe that an outcome of a reading program should be making our students love to read.
Okay.
We want to get them so they will look at a book not as a grammar translation exercise, but as a source of pleasure, a source of joy.
And again, that is if you provide them with lots of books,
Yes,
interesting books.
Yes, and I want to talk about the third one, then I'll talk about the second and third together. The third outcome of a reading program, I believe, is getting our students hooked on books, having them become what I call lifelong readers.
Yes.
So
yes.
when they leave our classrooms and they are older, they will still be reading in English or the other foreign language that
in
we
fact,
might be teaching.
it really ties on so well with our distance education programs.
Yes.
Because the whole point of a distance education program is lifelong learning.
Yes, yes.
So if we haven't inculcated in them the reading skill, the desire to read, they can never be lifelong learners.
If we don't do that, I think that we have failed.
Yeah.
We really have failed. So I think that we really want to, teachers and students, you must insist that your teachers do this, is have joyful reading and lifelong reading as goals.
Yes.
Either for yourself or as a class. Now, we know from the research that there are 4 factors that influence joyful reading and lifelong reading. And the first one is the teacher. Maybe, not the primary one, because these 4 are all important, but if the teacher loves reading, is passionate about reading, and shares that joy, that love, that passion, maybe the students will catch it.
Yes.
And I like to ask teachers when I do workshops, is reading caught or taught?
Caught.
Caught or taught?
What is it?
Well, do students catch it?
Yeah.
Is it an infectious disease somehow that they
yes,
catch?
It's an infectious disease.
Yeah,
I think,
or is it actually taught to them? And that's kind of a trick question because I think it's a combination.
Okay.
But certainly it's caught. It's caught if the teacher is passionate and is a model of a reader and shares her or his love of reading. And if the teacher doesn't do that, both of these outcomes, joyful reading and lifelong reading, they're not going to happen.
Okay.
No. And the second one, I said there were 4 factors influencing joyful and lifelong reading. The second one is the materials themselves.
Yeah.
It's the library. It's what's available. Not only should we have a lot of books in the library, but we've got to have books that are of interest to our students.
Yes.
And they've got to be on a variety of topics and a variety of levels, as I mentioned before. Very, very easy books all the way up to more first language reading material. And if we have this variety of topics and materials that are on different topics, biography, science fiction, sports, romance, whatever, comics, magazines, newspapers.
In India, we just have this tradition of having a lot of classics.
Ah, mistake.
It's a mistake, isn't it?
Big mistake, yes. Because if you have the classics, that is the goal. That is the goal of our reading program.
Yeah.
We don't start with the end.
Yes.
We start at the beginning where
Yes.
our students are.
Yes.
So if we have these classics, which are great, but that is a goal that we want to work to, we have to start with easy and interesting materials.
Yeah. Because you go to an Indian library and you'll get all the classics. Even at the university level. I mean, where you can have them, but even in a primary level, you'll have these made easy classics.
Yeah.
Which isn't so very interesting.
Yeah.
And is there a 4th point?
Yeah. The 4th point, actually that was the second point, materials.
Okay.
The 3rd point we know is the instructional approach. If it's a grammar translation approach or comprehension or skills and strategies, those will not result in joyful lifelong reading. Research shows that very, very clearly. Students don't get bored with it. They don't like it.
Yes.
So the approach is very important.
Very important.
And the 4th one is the experience that the students have while they're learning to read in English. If they have difficult, hard, unsuccessful experiences, they will think of themselves as poor readers. And they will think, I can't read, it's too difficult. And they might think something is wrong with them. I'm not smart, I just can't learn.
So what do you do? Give them easy books?
Yes.
Okay.
So if they get easy books and all of a sudden they can read a book, oh, I can do this.
Yes.
They become confident and their whole attitude changes. I will never forget the first time that I was teaching at a private girls' school in Japan, maybe 20 years ago it was. And I gave them easy, interesting books, all 25 girls on Friday afternoon. I sent them home for the weekend.
Yeah.
And I said, please, try to read this book over the weekend. Now, these girls had never read a book in English in their lives. They had the textbooks, but not these books.
Yes.
So Monday morning came, and I'm in the classroom worried, what's going to happen.
Yeah.
I have this image in my mind of this young girl coming in, waving a book, saying, "Sensei, sensei."
The teacher. Yes.
"Sensei, sensei, I read a book in English."
Oh,
Big
wow.
smile on her face.
Yeah.
I'll never forget that moment. I realized something's important's going on here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was that, did the dream come true?
Yes,
Oh,
and that was
wow.
my beginning
Yeah.
of working with extensive reading.
Okay. Let's go on to the classroom, the
Okay.
Indian classroom.
Okay.
We do talk about pre-reading skills, the while reading activities, the post-reading. I mean, in our material that we send to our teachers, the teacher training material that we send, we have these 2 courses on teacher training. We do talk about this. So can you just elaborate a little bit on the pre-reading, the while reading, and the post-reading?
Sure. These 3 phases, pre, while, post, are associated with skills and strategy reading.
Okay.
Yeah. They're not, generally, we don't associate them with extensive reading. Now, the idea of the pre-reading is to do 2 things. And this is where your schema theory question came in a little while ago.
Yeah.
The idea is that we have knowledge in our mind, and it's organized in various schemata, the plural of schema is schemata. And what the idea is to help the students begin to think about the topic of the reading. So if you're going to read a story or a text, an academic text, let's say on holidays in United States.
Yes.
Very common.
Very common, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what you want to do is begin to get them to think about what they know on that topic, so they can relate their knowledge to the topic of the reading. Remember at the beginning I said that reading is an interactive process where we use our knowledge to interact. Now, unless we realize that we know something about the topic and use that to understand the text, it's going to be hard to do. And students, when they're reading in a second or foreign language, sometimes they forget they know something about the topic of the text.
Yeah.
So this pre-reading work
is very, very important.
Is done for that purpose.
And you've already actually talked about the while reading. And the post-reading we will talk about.
Sure.
The while reading was part of the discussion that we had earlier. And the post-reading is the extensive reading that we're going to talk about in the next...
Well, post-reading in this skills and strategy sense is actually practicing the strategies or answering comprehension questions, looking at spelling, those sorts of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, Dr. Day. It was indeed a pleasure, and I'm sure our teachers would have... I have got so much from you, so our teachers would have got as much and much, much more.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Very enjoyable.
Thank you.